Is there a way to test this to see if the sound is coming through? Last time there was some problem.
I can just open the link.
Yeah, open the link for me to see whether everything's okay.
Get the horrible feedback. Just
Good
open
tricky.
the link.
Testing. Yeah, open the link for me to see whether. Yeah, just delayed. Yeah,
Got a delay.
perfect. Okay, so turn it on. Very good.
It looks awesome with the kitchen in the back. Doesn't it?
Yeah, it looks a little funny place for Shiur, but yeah, I guess so. Yeah, that is strange. The kitchen Shiur. I think Franklin Roosevelt used to sometimes speak for me.
Used to what?
I think he had like these, intimate conversations during the war.
What from his kitchen?
They called them the kitchens.
Fireside chats.
Fireside chats, really. Excellent. All right, sorry for the delay, but the delays were really Amtrak, I think. Was it Amtrak or New Jersey Transit?
Some subway in New York.
Okay, whatever. There were some backups. This time it's really not my fault for a change. So welcome to. It's really a combination of we didn't have a shiur, at least a public shiur, Tazria, and Mitzvah, of course, was this week together with Shabbos haGadol. So I thought it was a good opportunity to really bring all of the main inyanim, the Vayikra, and the developments of the Mishkan and the relationship to Karbonis and to Avodah, which of course is itself centrally Nogea Shabbos haGadol, according to the simple meaning of Shabbos haGadol. Shabbos haGadol has to do, or I wouldn't say simple meaning, but the mythical meaning. Shabbos haGadol is called Gadol because of the maze and the fact that we went openly with against Mitzrayim and all of the things that before we timed were so dangerous. Now all of a sudden with a Bikur, Arba Yomim, and they all see that we have a tide and so on. So it's very deeply Avodah oriented, but there's very profound interrelationships that on the surface they sound not essential. And when we take a look at them, we see that they're really very, very basic in understanding the nature of Pesach, understanding the nature of what Shabbos haGadol is coming to deal with. And as you know, the real meaning of Shabbos haGadol is the Yom haGadol HaNoira. It's based on the concept of the coming Geula. So we call it Shabbos haGadol because of the mention of Eliyahu Navi and the Yom Hashem, which is coming, and that, of course, is really the Haftocha. The ultimate Haftocha is not for Yetzias Mitzrayim per se, but Yetzias Mitzrayim as a precursor to the nature of Geula and a Binyan Abayis HaShlishi and so on. So the way in which we close, even though that's not the real close. The real close is Penavovi Kesef It's Cherem. But we repeat the last words. Based on that haGadol, we cut out the Hanorah. That's the only thing we cut out. We cut out everything that has to do with Hanorah because we don't have the guts to face up to it. In actuality, the Teimanim do not cut out the aspects of Norah. And the beginning, we take a very sweet beginning, which is the Orval Hashem Minchas Yuda V'Yerushalayim. It sounds very nice for the Ashkenazim and for the Sfaradim. But to start the parak where it begins, 3 seconds before, this is the last parak in all of Tanakh. So it's certainly a meaningful description of the entire idea of the Geula that's coming. I mean, you'll see right away why we cut it out. If we want to cut out Hanorah, we're certainly going to cut out these opening horrible, because basically it's making, the Navi is making fun of our "we want Mashiach now" attitude, and Eliyahu HaNavi and everything's so sweet and nice. So basically it reads, Hineni Shaleach Malachi Ufina Derech Lifanai Upitom yavo el heichalo ha'adon asher atem mevakshim. You seem to keep singing about we want Mashiach. No, that's our most it's a reference to Melech HaMashiach. And Malach HaBrit asher atem chafetzim. That's Elio Malach HaBrit. You think it's going to be all fun and games. Hine ba amar Hashem tzvaot. Problem is, umi mechalkelet yom bo'o mi ha'omed be'hiravoto. You think you're going to be able to absorb the shock of his coming, and you'll be able to stand straight when he shows up. Ki hu ke'esh mitzaref u'chaforit mechapsim v'yashav mitzarev u'mitaher, and so on. Then v'orval Hashem mitchat Yehuda v'Yerushalayim. Now, of course, this is part of the entire idea of Geula, that Geula is not a simple thing. It's not a process which is kula easy. And I mean, we know from Yitzias Mitzrayim, Echad Mechabishim was Yotzi Mitzrayim, Echad Shesh Me'ot Elef, and different Lashonos, but whatever it is, that process was a very, very difficult process. And that's Berumas back at the beginning of the vision that was given to Avram Avinu itself. Remarkably, the Ge'orval Hashem Minchat Yehuda v'Yerushalayim. Let's start from the sweet part. Ge'orval means sweet. Right? Let's start from the sweet part. And that pasuk, Chazal relates specifically to Parshas Mitzorah, of all things. I mean, the last thing you'd think, right? What in the world is Ge'orval Hashem have to do with Parshas Mitzorah? So, the Medrash says like this. Is that someone who wants to get on or what? Okay, fine. So the Medrash says like this in Shiur that Rav Shmuel Bar Yitzchak explains the pasuk in Shiur HaShirim that says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has Taltalim Shecharot Ka'orev. So Taltalim Shecharot Ka'orev is a reference to parshas in the Torah that appear to be very dark. They look ki'urot v'shechorot mila omran berabim. They look so disgusting that they shouldn't be read in public. And that's a reference to these parshas. I mean, why in the world would we get up at the Beit HaKnesset and we start talking about, menstrual cycles, and sperm, and the cancer, but it's horrible. What would we want to stand up in the middle of shul? And yet, Omar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Shecharot ke'orev is lashon arevut, sweet. You think they're ugly, and to me they're beautiful, because the pasuk says, "V'orval Hashem minchat Yehuda." Teidalach, and I'll prove that it's true. Because the parshas, it would have been easy for the Torah to write together the parshas of Zav and Zava. So Zav and Zava, you're trying to avoid talking too much about ugly things, which people think are ugly. But Lo Nemru Shteim Kechad, or Zub B'fnei Atzma, Zub B'fnei Atzma. Shnei Ish Kiyeh Zav Min B'saro. You have a whole separate parsha, Isha Kiyazuv Zov Doma. So obviously the Torah not only does not find any hesitancy in expressing things like this in public, but Adonai HaKadosh Baruch Hu seems to find them particularly interesting. Obviously, I think it's important for us to find out why HaKadosh Baruch Hu thinks the things that we think are ugly are so pretty. But that's one of the things that we need to find out, which is part of the surprise of the whole Parshas HaGeula and so on. But that relates directly our Haftarah to Parshas Mitzorah. The next thing that relates, mamish, beautifully to Inyanim is the entire Rambam in his description at the very end. He concludes the entire 16 prokim of the dinim of Tumas Tzoras. All those 16 prokim, he concludes with one halacha. He talks about the various elements of Tzoras and how it's a term that's used in many, many different ways. But the point is that all of it is nogea this miraculous relationship that we have with the Kadosh Baruch Hu to show us how to speak. And that the idea of a person, the way he puts it, is a person who wants somebody who wants to make something of his life. He wants to learn how it is he should be living. So he has to learn, therefore, not to hang around people that are engaged in the type of discussions that normal people are discussed. So the Bnei Adam, Harisha'im, Hatipshim, Shemarbim, Ledaber Gedolot V'niflaot. They have all kinds of brilliant things to say. They're always very stupid. לפיכך ראוי למי שרוצה לכוון לחותיו להתרחק מישיבתם לדבר עמהם, כדי שלא ייתפס אדם ברשת רשעים וסכלותם. What is the Reshet Risha'im? Reshet Risha'im has to do with speech. וזה דרך ישיבת הליצים, הרשעים. First, they just talk stupidities. בתחילה מדברים בדברי הוואי. People sit around and they talk things that are just dumb and things that they know nothing about. But the important thing is to blab. And that's the pasuk. They call ksil barov dvarim. You got to talk and talk and talk and talk. The dumber you are, the more you have to say. ומתוך כך באים לספר בגנות הצדיקים. And that's what it says, תעלם לספסי שקר. ומתוך כך, they start speaking about עניינים ואמונה, לדבר בנביאים, לתת אופי בדבריהם. And then, מתוך that, they end up in kaifer beikar, speaking about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. ויאמר שטו בשמיים פיהם לשון תהלך בארץ. זוהי שיחת הרשעים. And this is what it's all about when you hang around these kind of people, because they really have nothing to say. I mean, I'm, being makatsu. אבל שיחת כשרי ישראל, אין אלא בדברי תורה וחוכמה, ולפיכך הקדוש ברוך הוא עוזר ידם ומזכה אותם בה. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu helps them and gives them their schus, the life, through their speech, שנאמר. And then he quotes the end of our Haftarah. אז נדברו יראי השם איש אל רעהו, ויקשב השם וישמע, ויכתב ספר זיכרון לפניו, ויראי השם לחושבי שמו. And that's the end of Tumas Saras. Now that means that the height of the achievement here that Malachi is speaking about, which is in the end, the Zichru Taras Moshe, and everything that comes from that, has to come first from this new idea of the ability for people to learn to speak. When they learn to speak like this, then in the end, that will be, and this of course is a reference to Sefer Zichronot that HaKadosh Baruch Hu writes, is the reference to Kol HaKatuv L'Chaim B'Yerushalayim. Where, say the Rishon, where's the Katuv L'Chaim? Here's where's Katuv L'Chaim. The Sefer Zikaron that HaKadosh Baruch Hu writes is the Katuv B'Chaim. So that means the ultimate din and the Yom HaDin and the Hashlama of the Geula to come. It's all a function of the Az Nidbaro. And the Az Nidbaro is itself part of the Totzah of Hilchos Toras for some reason. This is where the Rambam brings that idea. Now these are interrelationships that we've seen many times in the past. I'll just be maskir to you rapidly. The very, very profound interrelationship between the inyanim that we speak about, that are shecharot ka'orev, what in the world they have to do with each other. So we have all of the aspects of reproduction in the beginning of Leda, which begins with Kitazriya, which has nothing to do with Leda, as the Zohar points out, shouldn't be there. And yet the second parsha ends with actually Zera and Zivas and so on. So obviously from there we learn out Kitazriya that even if Afilu Yoda Kamoshi Izriya, in other words, it was a completely destroyed embryo and so on. And somehow that is related as the surrounding envelope to the inyanim of Tzaras, all of these different levels of Tzaras. And the way that we understood it, and we saw this brilliantly from the amazing Ruach HaKodesh Rabbeinu Bach, who views the Yetzira itself. And this, of course, is the way Chazal view this whole story, is that it's the story of the Yetzira. Kishem Shitzirat Adam Achar Kol Behema Chayav Ha'ov. So the last step in evolutionary history is Adam, so too is the Torah Shel Adam. There's obviously Torah Shel Adam in terms of Yetzirah itself. And basically the idea here, as Rabbeinu Bachya points out, is Davar Be'ito Matov. That's how he starts the Pasuk. And the Simchat Adam is B'ma'aneh Piv. Again, the Davar Be'ito you'd think is only the question of Lashon Hara. But he relates it to Yetzirah itself. And he says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, essentially, the idea of the information that's embedded in Ma'aseh Bereshis is instantaneous. That's the Bereshit bara Elohim, that's the beginning. And the Bereshit bara Elohim has to do with everything that comes afterwards. It was all one particular moment. The only thing is that it was Mashal Amadavardena to a farmer, an organic farmer, right? So he's got the whole thing planned out, and he basically has crops that are built along such a way that each one comes out at its time and is built along whatever was prepared from before, so that the nutrients of the previous crop provide for the next crop and destroy the aphids of the next crop and so on. Very brilliant idea. And that's Davar Be'ito Matov. He doesn't have to be Zorea separate crops. He throws everything in at one time, and it's staggered according to Davar Be'ito. That, says Rabbeinu Bachya, that's the way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world, essentially, which is a beautiful description of the way in which, incredibly, all of the potential information is there initially, and the gradual development of how that information becomes significant is each thing is Davar Be'ito. When it becomes possible through the previous steps of memory that have been achieved and structures that have grown, and they provide for the next structures, and each complexity provides a new level of complexity to come, you end up with an incredible story of Rashis, which requires basically, as Dawkins put it, an infinitely lazy creator, so to speak. In other words, you don't need to do anything more once the Bria can learn to express itself, and it will end up making itself what it makes. But that means that in the same way, of course, in the most astonishing way, that's exactly what we have in terms of reproduction. We have one simple coding that is in every single cell, and that simple coding is mostly all about Davar Be'ito. In other words, most of the instructions that people never understood are not for proteins, but for timing, essentially. So start, stop switches that have the built-in sense of Davar Be'ito, such that the information is expressed only by becoming the right thing at the right time in the right place, and maintains the correct geometric configurations, which end up literally giving the instructions meaning, so that because of the position in embryonic development, a certain cell will become an eye, another cell will become a liver, and all of that has to do just with Davar Be'ito. Davar Be'ito u'b'mekomo. Any violation of Ito u'mekomo becomes a disaster, of course, in embryonic development, so it becomes a mutation. And any change in that Davar Be'ito, in terms of what we generally think is over once a child is born, becomes a malignancy. So in other words, whatever is not in its place, and whatever begins to be not the thing for the time and for the moment, becomes tzaras. And that's a tzaras mam eret. And amazingly, the Chazal say that is an expression of Ama Negaim Ba'im. So either it's on that next level up of the development of instructions, which of course is language itself, and that's the complexities of language that can give over instructions in completely different ways. And that's a reference really to the Oisyer Shenim Rubam Shamayim Ba'aretz, which we talk about in terms of Betzalel. In other words, when you look at the simple instructions of DNA, then the taking for granted the way that things fit together by allowing them to develop through chaotic mechanisms, the Oisyer Shenim Rubam Shamayim Ba'aretz is an instruction set that provides for the potentialities, which afterwards play themselves out through what appear to be chaotic processes. But what this means is that the interrelationship of genetics and mimetics In other words, the idea in which we can transfer a completely different sense of information, which I'll talk about, through our speech. That has to do with the profound relationship of the breakdown of cellular mechanisms in malignancy, which is saras, and the related breakdown in terms of speech. And therefore, say Chazal, that just as we find basically in English, that the concept of malignancy relates directly to maligning for some reason, right? So as we understand that the subconscious development of language is absolutely shocking sometimes. You better close that door. It's getting filled with bugs. Mistake. So too here, when we talk about the first stages of information, the interrelationship of the simple information is what ends up creating these structures, both in terms of reproduction and in the breakdowns. And the way that Chazal put it even more beautifully is that it's not only on Lashon Hara, but al hanichnas b'tchum she'eno shelo. You go into a place where you don't belong. Which, of course, is a beautiful description of cancer. And you are no longer what it is that you are supposed to be doing. This is a theme that has to do with the entire nature of Vayikra. In other words, the interrelationship of Vayikra with Vayikar, the nature of one could say, meaning, instead of simply information in the Shannon sense of information, mathematical sense of information, in which this is significant. It's information because it's significant to us. It's significant in terms of quantum evolution. Something came from it, so that makes it significant. The idea of inserting a concept of meaning into information makes no sense from a purely practical point of view, mechanical point of view, is where would meaning come from? So the idea of meaning would be a completely human interference in what we mean by information, because meaning has to mean a reference to something else. Otherwise, the word mean doesn't mean anything, right? So in other words, I'm looking at this, and I'm saying, to me, this is meaningful. Okay, so you think that to me this is meaningful is, that's a romantic kind of notion. But in reality, we know that the nature of structure has turned out, only over the past, century, has turned out to require within it this concept of meaning. In other words, to be able to determine whether there's truth, in other words, is there a consistency, complete consistency, it's not possible to do so mathematically unless there is something else against which to measure it. That's the whole the discovery of haGadol. So the incompleteness theorem means that by definition there always has to be some level that's beyond the level that you're talking about in order to be able to discuss it. From within, it's impossible to be able to determine anything which remains just mikra. The idea of kriya is that I apply a reference to something external. And that reference to something external is not romance, because it's part of the very mathematics that defines the issue of information itself. And this has begun from the beginning of Vayikra. This has been the fact. The Parsha Zohar began with that, the fact that I insist that there is a sense of order and meaning. And that became Parsha Zohar. I mean, it's amazing, the interrelationship of tsaras, the idea of the modern visions of cancer and malignancy, is to such an extent that we associate almost as a given that part of the results of treatment for cancer is the loss of all the hair, which is exactly what you have to do for tsaras. You have to shave off all of this hair. It's part of the ripui of the tsaras, which is absolutely crazy. I mean, what a weird coincidence, and mamish nuts. But that idea of the interrelationships, fabulous book by Eco, which we've spoken about on various occasions, Foucault's Pendulum. Yeah, but one of the most amazing things in Foucault's Pendulum is the way that he's made on the relationship of cancer to the Vayikra and Vayikar. I mean, it's mamish unbelievable. This is what happens over there. He said is that basically these guys get together. It's a very postmodernist book. Right? So it's trying to show there's a complete breakdown of any relationship to reality when you engage in those kind of games. So these guys have created this idea in which they're going to play games with language, play games with text, and so on. Right? And one of the guys comes down with cancer. Right? So he starts talking to his friend, right? And he says, listen, I'm dying because I convinced myself that there was no order, that you could do whatever you like with any text. I spent my life convincing myself of this. I, with my own brain. My brain must have transmitted that message to my cells. I mean, why should I expect them to be wiser than my brain? So I'm dying because we were imaginative beyond bounds. There's no gvulas, which is exactly the issue of the violation of the gvulas, for Sinai and so on and so forth, right? So then it goes on like this. He had also the transparency of the thing in the science fiction movie, that absence of boundary between exterior and interior, which is mamish the whole idea of achremos, between skin and flesh, between the light fuzz on his belly, discernible in the gap of his pajamas, and the mucolaceous tangle of viscera that only X-rays or a disease in advanced state can make visible. And this guy's talking this out as horrifying to his friend. So he says like this. He says, this is crazy that he writes this in this book. He says, Rabbi Meir, when he was learning from Rabbi Akiva, he mixed vitriol in the ink. Right? That's kankanton. And Rabbi Akiva didn't say anything to him. But Rabbi Meir asked Rabbi Shmuel whether he's doing the right thing. He said to him, son, be cautious in your work. Shema, if you omit one letter, you write one letter too many, you destroy the whole world. We tried to rewrite the Torah. And we didn't, we paid no heed, whether too many letters, too little. So the other guy says, yeah, but we were just joking. He says, you don't joke with the Torah. And we were joking with history, with other people's. No, there's nothing that's not a book. Now listen. This is, you understand. You think that the rabbis, when they spoke of Torah, were talking about a book, they're talking about a scroll. They're talking about us, about remaking our body through language. You want to manipulate the letters of the book? So then you need Chassidus. We didn't have it. Every book is interwoven with the name of God. We start playing with all of these words. Listen to me, damn it. Somebody concerns himself with the Torah. He keeps the world in motion and keeps in motion his own body as he breathes and he studies. There's no part of the body. It doesn't have an equivalent in the world. You change the book, you alter the world. You alter the world, you alter the body. That's what we didn't understand. He goes through the whole Zohar about hiding, revealed only for a moment to its lover. It's like a beautiful woman who hides the Zohar. He doesn't identify as the Zohar. So the words of the Torah reveals itself to someone who loves it. We approach books without love, in mockery. So what did my cells do? They invented a different plan. So now they're proceeding on their own, creating a history, a unique private history. So my cells have learned that you can blasphemize by anagrammatizing the book and all the books in the world. Now they learn to do this with my body. So they invent and they transpose and they alternate. They transform themselves into cells unheard of, new cells without meaning, with meaning contrary to the right meaning. There must be a right meaning and a wrong meaning. Otherwise, you die. It's all very nice to talk about it as theory. It's just amazing. So the question of Seder, of Zechira, and so on. Push just to see as a writer how simple that is, how real that is. Astounding. And the truth is, of course, as we become more and more aware of those relationships, we can understand more and more of the tremendous arevus that Kadosh Baruch Hu did. In other words, when people were unaware of the nature of the information that is stored within biology. So there was no chavivas, there was nothing beautiful. There was only tipa srucha, and the ugliness of the mush of biology, and the terror of the, of the squishy organs, and the completely not understandable processes that are going on that appear to be all magical and then just distant from anything you'd want to know about. And as we become more and more aware of the interrelationship between that stage of the initial stages of process, which so miraculously the zikaron that is created by Darwinian mechanism. That's what it's all about. It's about zechira. That's all that natural selection is pure zechira. Something makes a difference, it becomes significant, it becomes remembered in a molecular change. And then that allows for the next level of memory until there's trillions of these little changes that can do the most unbelievable things. As we learn more and more about that, a sperm cell is not something that is a tipas rucha to us. It becomes arevas, becomes the most beautiful, astonishing interrelationship of Torah and biological information, in which we begin to see that the most chaviv things in the world are the most information-rich things in the world, so that all of history is embedded in things that people used to laugh at and completely misunderstand. Now, the amazing thing is that once that's true, and we have to understand that the transition from something that was shachar to something which is arev, to Adam as well, that transition is a transition that really begins with Bris Milah, which is the first stage in which Adam is informed that biology has ended, so to speak. Now there's going to be too much interference in biology, and now there is the time of Adam. The difference between the Vayikar and the Vayikra is a completely new world. The davar be'ito matov that was defined by the coincidences, so to speak, of nature, and by the development that took place entirely within randomness, is of a completely different sort than a period of development in which Adam defines the davar be'ito. And so, in other words, his language, his discoveries, his new ways of looking at things, his understandings are much more effective in changing the world and changing the organisms in the world and the choices of the world, by the way, which of course is part of the Vayikra itself, is the development of those organisms. That's the Vayikra Adam Shema, so-called Behemah, the actual development of organisms that were not part of nature, that become devoted and connected to the development of humanity specifically. And that's why even in a completely secular environment, the concept of Yom HaShmini, which is that transition to that new world, I mean, that was the name that was given to the first real book about genetic manipulation. It's called the 8th day, because 7 days represent to everyone the old sense of creation. The 8th day is the new world, and that's always the Yom HaShmini, which is exactly what begins all of these parshas. Here, what takes place, all of these parshas are given on that day as a response to the breakdown in the mechitzas, which Echo here was talking about. And in the deepest sense, the transition is not only a very complicated, painful one, which I'll explain why, obviously, in a moment, but essentially that transition is the entirety of what we call Olam Hazeh. Olam Hazeh is the period of the transition between the development of nature, which had nothing to do with us, and the gradual learning how to speak. So that the Az Nidbaru is the end of the transition in which language becomes as real and as freed of pure mikra as Adam is capable of. And the reason that that's true is, and it's clear why this has to happen. When there is such a transition, the initial mechanisms, there is no way to hand over. You can't hand over the keys. So there are mechanisms that are created, which are translated into human terms, right? There's all types of ancillary developments that are not part of the direct biological needs. We don't need to be capable of philosophical speculation in order to be able to utilize intelligence to be able to defeat lions, obviously. So those developments are ancillary developments, not part of the requirements of biological evolution. And if we're not philosophical, we have a better chance of survival. So, I mean, they're almost inimical to the development of humanity. The same thing is true, of course, with aesthetics. It's all very nice for there to be a need for attraction in order to be able to reproduce. But the more complex idea of aesthetics, in which there will also be a determination of how it is that you want your genitals to look, which is part of bris milah, that is outside of nature. And again, because the longest, this is my father's, that's all pointed out, is a beautiful thing. The longest experiment, the longest medical experiment in history has been the experiment as to whether there's any usefulness for foreskins. And the answer is, for removing foreskins. And the answer is no. If there would be a use for it, it would have made a difference in evolutionary biology, and we would have lost our foreskins. What kind of idiot would have to go ahead now and make 10,000 people will see whether there's value in removing their foreskins if billions of humans were already checked out? And basically, nature is the longest, most wonderful experiment. So, I mean, what are you looking for? Obviously, there's no use in it. Okay, so then if that's the case, we're talking about a completely new level of using ancillary mechanisms. So, yeah, obviously, there needs to be attraction. Does there need to be love? No. We have plenty of love-like relationships among organisms that we don't feel would experience love the way we feel them, but they can be monogamous, they can be committed, they can continue to provide child care without the sense of what we would call love and writing, love poems to their mate or love letters to their children. And it would be a joke. But nonetheless, those ancillary developments are central to what it is that we utilize in order to get along in life. The reason that the transition is so problematic is because there's no clear cutoff point between the two. In other words, it's very difficult for us to say where the attraction that took a bee to a flower ends and the love that took us to beautiful genitals begins. I mean, that's, And the truth is, the way the Medrash puts it, is that is the Ityo Shel Nachash. In other words, afilu chassid b'chasidim. The guy may be the most developed of human beings in terms of cutting himself off from the pure mikra of biology. But the bottom line is that the mechanisms that he's going to use are going to end up needing to be reptilian on one level.
Is that the Midah Gufanit
Right?
from a few weeks ago?
Yeah, we mentioned it there in the Shiur. I mean, here it's a slightly different context, but the idea is that this is David HaMelech's father, right? This is the Yisha Avi David, this is Beit Bityo Shel Nachash. And David HaMelech defines that the Midah Bityo Shel Nachash is the fact that his mother and father lost interest in each other after sex. What would that mean? Why would my mother turn to one side of the bed? My father turns to the other side of the bed. And why isn't anybody involved in conception? I mean, now is when things start happening. It's all very nice that you had all of this fun, but what does that have to do with the important things? Those were just mechanisms, right? Which is an astounding thing. So this is like the person who was completely rochik from any sense of avera, but was unable to do what you got to do in order to be able to go beyond. How do you go beyond? So this idea of the transitional phase in which you're always going to be left with something that you're unable to fully integrate into the human aspect of the experience, that inability means that the transition is going to be very painful because it is never complete. You always find yourself dragged back into something that is essentially outside of your control. So if it's outside of your control, then it's no longer yet transitioned into the Vayikra as opposed to the Vayikar. That aspect that was out of your control is still under the control of nature and randomness. And therefore, it's still part of the Vayikar. Anything that is left open for the Vayikar, as the Rambam points out in the Mora, is also open to random events that will affect you, like a car crash, or like, a mutation of a gene with a cosmic ray, and so on and so forth. Because you're still living in that world which definitions don't really define. They define possibilities, but they don't yet define your realities. To that extent, the breakdown in the utilization of language to get involved in absolute lies and in latzanas and in a breakdown of order and an attacking order and so on, that will end up destroying you in very profound ways, more than just opening yourself up to mikra, but in the end, and we know we're just beginning, the truth is we're just beginning to discover the interrelationship of our immune system to things that we believe and the way that we look at the world. I mean, the unbelievable effects that, people used to think were psychological and so on, and, like the placebo effect, which is not psychological. It's really a physiological effect. And it has like you have the same placebo effect even if you know it's a placebo. Well, it's crazy, right? So that means that we're just beginning to uncover how there could possibly be a relationship between our language and our thoughts and the realities of what happens to ourselves. And all of this echo stuff sounds like, weird, but the truth is that this underlying sense of the interrelationship of information and meaning has to go back to the idea of Yetzira and its relationship to, as David HaMelech puts it, this is another raya that the Medrash brings, Bechet yechamatni imi. So my mother gets turned on through reptilian drives, and that's how I get conceived. And therefore, we have the Chatat Yoledet, which of course is introduced here. This parsha is all about that aspect of the transition, which is the transition to language, which becomes Chatas Nachshon, based on the Nachash. That's Shmini, that's the breakdown of the Bechitzas. That's the time where everything bursts out. The interesting, the Nodava views, Knisa, L'mokum, the Tchum She'eno Shelahem, the resultant destruction at the moment of the transition to this new world, which is always the eighth day transition. So that's the first level that we have to see that's happening over here, is the grand transition between simple, useful, so to speak, significant, or more directly Shannon information, and the information that comes of Vayikra, and the insistence that Adam's memes and his ability to see truth, which implies necessarily a Godelian platform which to measure against, that transition is the beginning of the nature of Geula, and in the end becomes the Az Nidbru Yirei Hashem, and that becomes the Sefer Zikaron. Now that's the first level of the interrelationship of the Parshiyos with Shabbos haGadol itself. Now, remember that Pesach itself is also about language. And that's the next thing we have to recognize. That the idea of language that we're talking about over here has to do also with a profound interrelationship between the capability of dealing with language as something that is not micro-oriented, and language itself as a reflection of certain infrastructures within the human mind that allow you to create nonsense in a way. In other words, you notice the idea of Laila B'Shum Ruba Mina Mazikim is built into Masechet Psachim. I mean, Masechet Psachim, page after page after page, of concepts of Mazikim, right? Which to us is like, what are demons and, zugos, and so on and so forth, and all kinds of things that have all types of implications for the Seder Shal Pesach. But that's not just for the Seder Shal Pesach. That had to do with the nature of freedom. And which means that the development is linked, language and its development of clarity. And the truth is, the more you see Seder in the world, and the more powerful that Seder is, and the more you can understand the structure of reality in a way that's consistent and that provides a Mishnah for reality, a structure for reality, the less you are choshesh for mazikim, obviously. And the more you laugh about, what do you mean it's a haunted house? I'm fine, I'll sleep there. No, nobody's ever gotten out alive. No problem. I'll sleep there, I'll be perfectly happy. Right? So everybody else is going on, what was that thud? What was that bump? Oh no, it's coming for me, right?
Help me deal with sleep paralysis.
What's that?
I was dealing with sleep paralysis for a while, I remember.
Yeah.
Finally understanding this made me just like, what the heck?
Right, yeah, right. Now, that's a very common thing, is sleep paralysis, in which people imagine themselves being, they don't imagine. They actually see Shadim attacking them. They can't breathe. They're being choked to death. And they see the demons standing on their chest. It's amazing that people refuse to admit it to others because they're afraid that they'll be looked at as insane. But it's like a very, very common kind of thing. What's that?
It's more than a hallucination.
It's not, it's not. It's a pan-human kind of thing. And every society has the same images, and it's absolutely crazy. So it means you're dealing with very, very protean structures in the brain that are coming up with this kind of stuff, right? And all of
Sherlock Holmes.
What's that?
A young Sherlock Holmes. It was a movie when he was younger.
Mhm.
They have this Egyptian cult in London. They shoot these darts at different people, and you imagine, each person imagines like his worst nightmare coming to life. So you see things like attacking you from all sides, and people are reacting. People around them have no idea what's going on. They're looking, see the person just choking and trying to get something off his neck, and there's nothing there. So that's similar thing to
Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah. Right, exactly.
Laugh at them. So
Right. But I mean, this interrelationship to language and the way in which that's fundamental to freedom, which is part of this transition, as we'll see. That's Svat Lo Yadati Yeshma, the difference between Lashon HaKodesh that Paro couldn't possibly learn, which talks about the way in which it's not a one-to-one language in terms of a symbol set, but it's rather an integrated, holistic vision of reality that can't be taught. It's something that it can only be learned. It has to be learned, basically, as we've explained, through Torah. But all of these stresses, not only the mitzvahs, but in the places, the idea of piachirot, and the Mishnah, the mitzvah of haGadol, of aniyah, of lechem oni, lechem she'oni malav, of sibur, of amira, so that the mitzvah of zechorat hayom hazeh, which gives rise to all of these inyanim, is also embedded in a new way in Malachi here, in the Haftarah, B'Shabbos haGadol. And that is that one of the ways to understand Vayikatev Sefer Zikaron Lefanav is not that HaKadosh Baruch Hu needs a book to remember things by. It's a book of memory. In other words, the Zechorat Hayom Hazeh, your Zechira is incorporated in a book of Zechira. That's the point. And that means that the distance between the question of Avram Avinu, Bama Ida Ki Irashena, and the solution in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to him, Yadoa Teda Ki Ger Yezaracha, which I don't think that people recognize, that basically that's the equivalent of you're telling a child. It's not cynical. It's the equivalent of telling a child you'll understand when you get older. In other words, often a child will ask a question that is impossible to answer because there's no way that the answer can possibly mean anything to them. You can tell them all the answers in the world is going to go in one ear and out the other, or just create completely imaginary responses because he won't be able to consider what you're saying. So if you discuss reproduction with a child, to him it's, daddy plants a seed in mommy. He imagines daddy coming out, with a shovel. And I mean, what are you going to explain to him? It just doesn't add up. It doesn't mean anything, right? And so when you say, but really, you will understand when you get older. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Yodoa Teda Ki Ger Yezarecha, it's an answer to the Baba Eda. It's not cynical. You're asking me how I'll know? Okay, you'll find out when you go through hell. That's not the point. So in other words, the question of Baba Eda is an indication of an insufficient level of development, which is brought out very powerfully by the way in which it turns into the fainting of Avram. Because the fainting itself is an indication that the Tardema, the Yisron that falls on him, is that there is no way, and that's what Malachi says over here. You think you're going to stand up to these surprises, and then you have it all figured out. I mean, are you really stupid or something?
Like a system failure, shut down, it's overload.
Yeah, it happens all the time. People shut down. It's just too inconceivable. The same thing that happens to Daniel when Daniel is shown the nature of the molecules in his visions. And he says, I'm just so terrified I couldn't get up off the floor. I was just literally busted. This is because it really is. It's an overload. It's a mental overload in which I don't have the mechanisms, I don't have the metaphors, I don't have the experience, and I don't have the sense of self yet that takes thousands of years to develop in order for me to understand what this means. Obviously, Bama Eda obviously doesn't mean that I doubt the gift of Eretz Yisrael, because the Kadosh Baruch Hu had already told him about the gift and he was perfectly happy with it. It's the Yerusha aspect. Now, the Yerusha aspect has to do with the interrelationships of genetics and memetics, which is central to understanding Pesach. The idea of Pesach is that it's the one time in which there is an absolute hakpada on putting genetics and memetics into one category. Usually when we talk about Banim, we mean Talmidim, equally with Banim. We do not mean that on Pesach. And that's simply because HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not say Livanecha. He said Lezaracha. And Lezaracha means literally your semen. That's the way in which it's translated in the Vulgate. It's Simini Avram, not the children of Avram. And the point is that that's why when Rabbi Akiva and when they're learning with each other, there's no Talmidim there. Why the Talmidim coming in to say, Rabbeinu, why aren't they talking to the Talmidim? It's a crazy situation. I mean, wouldn't that be the first thing? That's why if you don't have a ben, it doesn't say, so fine, so let his Talmud ask him. Let his friend ask him, right? Why not? No, it's only Ishto Shoalato. That's the only option. Either it's Ishto Shoalato or Shoel et Atzmo. What? Because the only area in which you have this interrelationship fundamentally is with the direct child and the implications of what you're saying to that genetic component that now becomes mimetically related to you by the seaport, the narrative of where he came from and what that past is, and the woman with whom you create the child who will give over that information in her way. But that's it. That's your responsibility to that genetic future. Nothing else is included, which means it's a completely different type of interrelationship. It's not about learning. It's not about the Talmud Torah aspect of it. So that means the development of your own, of course, it's not about the child, it's about you. The mitzvah, as the Rambam is based on the Mechilta, the mitzvah is not Hagadol Levincha. The mitzvah is Zechor et Hayom Hazeh. Hagadol Levincha is a way in which you achieve das through being modia. And that's how the Rambam talks about the mitzvah of Hagadol. Mitzvah lahodia levonim. So your zechira is part of that interrelationship. It's the broader sense of one's identity, which becomes now an extended identity, which we'll discuss the significance of. But in any event, the point of it, though, is that what you need to see over here is the achievement of a sufficient das to be able to relate to Bama'ida. Let me explain how incredibly much this is built into the halachas of Pesach itself. And this is why, of course, it will be mechuber to the idea of Shabbos haGadol here. In other words, what Shabbos haGadol is talking about is the impossibility of an advance notice of what this is about. The foolishness of believing that these transitions are simple transitions. And the understanding that in the end it will be the power of the nidbaru that will make the difference to you, which is saras and your ability to handle the inyanim of genetics and of the chiyuvim that you have through those genetics, right? And that is this. How do we know, bichlal, that there is a mitzvah of saying the haGadol that we say? I mean, the haGadol that we say on the surface seems to be insane. It has nothing to do with Pesach. Right? I mean, we talk about what amazing mitzvah it is, mitzvah to, the Sabbath is Mitzrayim, and then we talk about, yes, and even Talmidei Chachamim, Afiyu Kolana Chachamim, and Ma'aseh Rabbi Akiva, and so on and so forth. And then we stop talking about Jesus Mitzrayim, we go on to prove that we should be doing this by the fact that we should be darshaning Arani Ovidavi, which we fool you with. You're about to say Tzei Lamad, and you think, okay, now's the time to learn about Sibra Jesus Mitzrayim, and instead we change the subject completely. We never talk about Yetzias Mitzrayim again until we get to the Tzach Hadash B'Achav, and that's like, it's nuts. So where do we get such a thing from? I mean, it looks like somebody was drunk and wrote Haggadah. It's just unbelievable. Where in reality does that chiyuv come from? So it seems clear, even though there's no one who talks about it, but it seems clear that the mokar is the fact that the Torah introduces the Arami Ovidavi with the words haGadol Hayom LaHashem Elokecha. It was the only place in the Torah where Haggadah is described as Haggadah is there. The remarkable connections between the two. In other words, the fact that all through Pesach, what we're doing is exactly what we do there by Bikurim. For some reason, by Bikurim, we're supposed to go over to the Kohen, and we're supposed to tell the Kohen, haGadol Hayom LaHashem Elokecha, which is weird here too. For some reason, we're supposed to be telling somebody else. It's my zechira, just like Bikurim is my mitzvah of avos Bikurim entirely. And for some reason, I am going to be Mekayim that mitzvah by telling somebody else about it. That can't be a coincidence. Furthermore, by Bikurim, we announce what it is that we are going to do and its significance before we do it. As we do throughout the Seder, from beginning to end. Whether it's in terms of, okay, Matzah Zushanoch L'Mashumar, Pesach Zushanoch L'Mashumar, Pesach Matzumar, or whether it's even in terms of, hey, we're about to tell you the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, and that is a very important mitzvah, and here's how to know it's very important, which is, why are we doing this? Because even this story is the story of the story of the story. I mean, it keeps getting more, a regress that goes back many steps. For some reason, that is a perfect expression of what it is that we're learning out from Bikurim. The interrelationship between the two is also clear. Obviously, the nature of the Bikurim is to address B'ma'ida, except in a completely different way. You asked Avram, B'ma'ida ki rashena, haGadol Hayom LaHashem Elokecha ki bati al haaretz asher. So in other words, Shvua shenishba lechem kima, basically. So there's nothing more to discuss. You could have had your doubts or whatever you wanted to at the time. I'm just telling you, Lamaisa, it's all okay. I guarantee you that it was done. Now, amazingly, haGadol Hayom LaHashem Elokecha. Remember that based on the Sifri. So Rashi says, what is the meaning of the haGadol Hayom LaHashem Elokecha? She'eni kafui tova. Right? So V'amarta lakon, you're supposed to go to the Kohen Asher B'Yamim Ha'em, V'amarta lo, and this is what you tell. So the Arami Oved Avi is somehow or other an expression of the fact that you are not. The fact that I'm telling you this is an introduction in which it's clear she'eni kafui tova, which l'chora has nothing to do with the words that are said. It just says, the Kohen, tell the Kohen. It doesn't say to say, I am not kafui tova. So somehow or other that means that saying that to the Kohen means that eni kafui tova, which doesn't add up. And why are we concerned? And why aren't we saying that I'm a makir tova? And why, I mean, the whole thing is weird. I say it in the negative. I try to say it to somebody else instead of saying it directly to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And if you're talking to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, just say it to him. Why are you talking to the Kohen? And how exactly does this part of it relate to the Haggadah Shel Pesach, so that the Haggadah there is interpreted to be similar, and yet there is no Kohen. We replace it with the children. And what exactly would that mean? If you take a look at the parsha itself of Kitavo, it ends with which means that what we're discussing is the question of das itself. B'ma eda, as we just understood it, is insufficient identity to understand. It isn't a question of doubt. It's just I don't absorb the way in which this is me. That's the problem. If it's a Yerusha, it means that it has to be so embedded in me that it's not something that changes. It's not a gift. It's an expression of what I am, and therefore will be an expression of what my children are. If you want to just tell me that you're giving me a gift, then that's fine. I'm ready to accept a gift. If you're telling me that it's a morasha, so then that means it's a heritage. It's something that is coming from Torah, from genetics, from inheritance, right? That
it's
I don't
that
see.
I have a shaykhus too.
And that my children will have a shaykhus.
But
Yeah,
but
that's me.
how do
Somehow or other it's
how
me.
do I know
right?
that this is going to happen?
Not how do I know. I don't know. In other words, I have no way of knowing is the meaning of Amaida. But since I don't find that in myself, I have no way of relating it to it. Explain to me how to relate to it, right? And this is totally different than the response of Avraham Avinu. The fact that he will have children, that's fine, right? Vayamin b'Hashem, right? V'achshavelo tzedakah, that was not a problem. I don't have any doubts about what you're telling me, but I have to have some way of relating to what you're telling me. So that means that the failure is essentially a failure in the type of an identity that can accept that level of extended tova as being an expression of myself. This was the failure back in Ma'aseh Bereshis itself, which is a failure of the acceptance of good. Remember, hakarat tova does not mean just to be aware of gratitude. It means to be aware of the good of the thing. So that, on the contrary, the more gratitude you have, the more kviyat tova you can have. Right? That's what happens on Har Sinai. The unwillingness to say atat titein was because of a supreme awareness of gratitude. I don't want to have that feeling of gratitude. I want to do it on my own. I certainly don't want to owe you for it. It's something that's outside of me. I mean, how am I supposed to relate it to it if it's coming from outside of me? So I want to maintain that distance that allows me to be me. So that means that whatever it is that I'm going to achieve here in the Haggadah Shel Pesach has to be related to a growing sense of what it is that I am, the achievement of my own das. That means that the same way that the parsha of Bikurim is an understanding of Arami Oved Avi, and that's through what? Through the fact that I'm telling you. That's the point. I'm not just walking in and telling the Kohen, okay, here's my basket. And then I say Arami Oved Avi. It's the fact that I want you to, you know what I'm about to do? You can't imagine what I am about to do. Okay, that's that I'm not a kafui tova. The very fact that I can share this as being what I am involved in, what I am excited about, That says, Ein Chakafui Tova. So therefore, go to the Kohen and let him know. Because that's the only point. I don't need him to know. There's nothing that he adds to the thing. But that's exactly what the Zechira of Pesach is about. That child will not respond to someone who has a problem in his own identity. There is nothing more destructive. It's part of the main problem of modern Orthodoxy. No kid will be persuaded that there's meaning in something that he sees that the parent couldn't care less about. Why would a child ask a question, Ma avodah zot lachem, when he knows it doesn't mean a damn thing to you? I'm going to ask why you're doing this. Why would I ask why you're doing this? Do I ask why you're doing Shabbos? You're doing Shabbos because it's Shabbos, That's what you're supposed to do. Do I ask why you're going to shul? No. Why should I? I know you're going to shul because you're bored, but you have nothing else to do. So whatever your practice is, as it's not interesting in any way. So I'm certainly not going to say, what does this mean to you? It doesn't mean anything to me. It's just my religion. Why would you ask whether it means something to me? So the Kish Alcha Bincha is a direct response to your level of awareness of your own identity as you do it. That's why the Meda Haggadah issues are Chayev Lirot et Atzmo. That's not something that's within the Haggadah. That's the Godelian platform of the Haggadah, as the Rambam says. Up until here, Kol Ela Advarim called Haggadah, and then he throws in, and now there's no halacha that is outside of the Haggadah. That's the idea. The Chayev Lirot et Atzmo. You see that very clearly. It's impossible. Unless you want to program a kid to ask the Manishtana, which is what people are reduced to doing. It's awful. So that becomes now yet another level of not caring about what I'm doing. The fact that now I will go through the motions of asking you 4 questions that I couldn't give a damn about. Which is horrific. And that's why obviously you come out of the Seder feeling like garbage. Because, So unless the thing ends up making a difference to you, there has that level of Zechira. So that level of Zechira itself becomes an identity that incorporates a level of consciousness in which you see yourself within Arami Avidav. In other words, Zechor et hayom hazeh asher yatzat b'Mitzrayim can only be achieved if I can see the meaning of Zechor et hayom hazeh. For me to simply say that I am now at liberty is not meaningful at all. If I could say that I'm free, then it's meaningful. But it's only free if it's part of a meaningful process in which my choices will lead to meaningful differences, right? Okay, so then that means that from the Arami Oved Ovin, and B'tchila of the Avodah Zarah, and the development of human understanding of what the real issues are in life, and that this was part of that. That is what enables the Zechira. That's the source of the consciousness itself. That's the amazing thing. Remember that Zechira does not only mean identity.
It's 20 hours.
Zechira does not mean recall. Zechira means consciousness. It's a completely different word. It's the original meaning of memory in English, which is mindfulness. It is something that you're aware of. It's rarely used that way today in English. In Hebrew, that's the way it's used, not as recall. Recall doesn't have any meaning. That's just information. That's the Zechira on the hard drive. It's not a Zechira that is meant to be the Zechira of Pesach. So that idea of consciousness is what? It's the interrelationship of the observer with the observed. It's the only time in which the observed is the observer of himself observing, right? So the broader the field of that consciousness, the broader is the sense of the power of what is being brought to bear on the instant of the moment's existence and what it is that you are present in. Correct? The two relationships, the relationship of freedom to liberty, is the relationship of the field of consciousness to the immediacy. So it boils down to the Zechira itself will be a function of what went into that Zechira. I can't talk about. That's the reason that we say, is the way to be Mekayim Matra Bignut Messiah B'Sheva. The awareness of difference is only by seeing that strange interrelationship. And this is the experience of consciousness. Without that experience, you don't have choice either. If you don't have choice, then you don't have freedom. You have to be able to stand above yourself in order to choose something. Otherwise, you're just making decisions from within. That again, that's Mikra. That again is the Nachash. That again is the pre-Vayikra period. The interrelationship of the Vayikar and the Vayikra is another way of looking at this interrelationship itself. So that transition requires Zechira on many, many different levels. The source of consciousness is the source of meaning, is the source of choice, which is the source of freedom. Obviously, the breadth of language embeds within it the possibilities and the multiple possibilities of your life. The more that you're capable of understanding the implications, the more the nature of the transition to Adam in this new idea of language, which becomes the nature of the Adam himself, who is the beneficiary of it. If you take a look at the word as nidbaru, you will understand that. Grammatically, the word makes no sense. Az yidabru. What does nidbaru mean? It's a ridiculous word. And it's a very rare word. The word nidbaru grammatically means those who have become that which has been spoken about, which is exactly the description, not only of the way that consciousness works in language, but the impact upon yourself of what it is that you've become conscious of. You cannot be a nidbar just by talking about something. You're a nidbar when those languages, well, what it is that you've said, have been the vehicle of changing the you who said it. That's what the word means, amazingly, right? So if that's the case, then these are operative words. When you say these words, they're operating on you, they're changing you. So the growing into the self that is capable of that understanding is part of the answering of B'ma'ida that you're doing at the Seder itself. Let's take that would be our second level take on this, is the development of identity and dot and its connection to the breath. And obviously when that breath goes all the way back to the level of talking about Yetzirah, and that of course is where the Chiyuv comes from, remarkably, because the Rambam says, Zechoret Hayom Hazeh is similar to the words of Zechoret Yom HaShabbat. The Zechoret Yom HaShabbat takes us all the way back to Yetzirah, which of course is expressed specifically in the difference between the first luchos and the second luchos, the description of the luchos, in which first the luchos of Yom HaShabbat are because Kisheshes Yomim Asa Hashem Asa Shemayim. But the other description of Shabbos is because Hashem took you out of Mitzrayim and so on. What does that have to do with it? Well, so we say Zech Litzias Mitzrayim. So that means the two issues over here, the development of a world in which we see Sheshes Yomim Asa, which is the period of Mikra, essentially, versus the Eila Tolda Shamayim Vars Bihi Baram, which is the presence of Adam, and the Yom HaShlishi, and so on, the development of Adam, Lahakir, Lispal, the Lava, the Shmor, and so on and so forth. So that interrelationship itself is built into the Aznid Baru. So the transition is built into Pesach itself as part of that transition. Now that Yom HaShabbos, taking us back to Yetzirah, is Laila Meshum Rabam Misheshis Yimei Bereshis, taking us back to Yetzirah, is Yetziras Adam, which comes Achrei Yetziras Kol Shar Be'ema Chaya V'Ov, and all of the klalot that are mentioned in these parashas or as the Pirkei Rebbe Eliezer brings out, each one of them is connected one piece of the story in Gan Eden, so that everything that appears here, all the various negat tzaras, different levels of tzaras, zivais, tumas leda, childbirth, pain in childbirth, and so on and so forth, the beds of Tel Dibanim, all of these things are part of that story. And the most amazing thing is the Medrash. It's really a crazy Medrash, but when you see it in this context, you suddenly begin to understand the deeper interrelationship of tzaras here. Not only when I say tzaras, I mean Tazria Mitzorah here, with the entire story of a process of creation that leads to Geula, which is this: Adam kebo or b'sro seita sepachat b'eret. Believe it or not, it's hakatuv yidaber b'malchiyot. You're talking about the same description of what appears in Ma'aser Bereshis as the Malchias. The Malchias appear in Bereshis as Tohu, Vavo, Choshech, Pnei, and Tahom. They appear with Avram Avinu, with Ema, Gedola, Ema, Kashecha, Gedola, Nofelet.
What do you mean? What's there mean, Malchias?
The Malchias, the different Galiyot. And the four, I mean, this is at great length, it goes through how it is that they're connected, but the four different Marais of Se'eto, Sabachat, Omeret, and so on, each one of them is connected to Malchias. And it brings the Lashon of Pasuk, you know. Sapachat is Madai, and the idea of Yovan, it explains why each one is connected, you know. You literally use Madua Niskaf Abirecha, V'niseita Mashal Hazeh. So on each word is connected one of the things that is expressed. In other words, in a way, this is the difference of the development of our sense of where the world is going and its relationship to the very nature of disease. The same developments, it's the steps of Yetzirah expressed in the differences of disease. Right? And I mean, there's different, obviously there's different medical paradigms of different diseases in different societies. But this means that it relates yet in a new way to Shabbos haGadol. In other words, the concept of Az Nidbru, the Malach HaBrit, and so on, is now related to Tzaras at a completely different level. The same Arba Goliaths that are expressed in Avram Avinu B'Ma'eda, which ends up knocking him out cold, and so on. And this is reflected in the growing difficulty in understanding the Manish Tanan, understanding Havdalah. Because remember, the development of Das is the development of discrimination. The development of freedom is the development of discrimination. The development of language is the growth and the development of discrimination. The more sophisticated you become, the more specific and clearly differentiated are the nuances and subtleties of meaning, and therefore the possibilities of expressing the ideas in ways that previously could not be fully expressed. That's true of every level of understanding. And of course, it's because of that Pesach, which is entirely about change and Havdalah, and the process of Havdalah of Yisrael ben Ha'amim, and the idea of Rashis being Mishra Yisrael, Shanikra Rashis, and the development of that, Va'avdil etchem min ha'amim liot li, you're not li, you belong to Nebuchadnezzar v'chaverav. That constant refrain throughout Vayikra of the need for Havdalah, which is, of course, the opposite of the idea of Tzaras, which is non-differentiation, non-differentiated cells which go around eating up differentiated cells and destroying the functionality, you know, which was part of that beautiful story in the Foucault's Pendulum. All of those Havdalah ideas which are expressed in Manishtana. So what has changed? That question, what has changed indeed? And the idea of Matchil Begnut, Messiah B'Shevach, and the idea of the brachas that we have, of the Mi'afela La'ora, Mishibud Degula, and so on and so forth. Right? All of those things are the understandings of change, differences. The problem of Geula is the unwillingness to contemplate change. And basically, the Havdalah gets more and more difficult as it becomes closer and closer to where you are. And it's because of this that the haGadol does this crazy thing with the Tzei Ulamad from Lavan. What in the world does that have to do with anything? Why do we say that, that Paro Lobike Shalalar and that the Zacharim and Lavan was Malakish Lakar Sakol? And what is all of that? It turns out that that's an amazing idea. Because the closer you get to similar things, the more difficult Havdalah becomes. Each one of the Goliyot presents problems that are more and more difficult to solve. It's amazing. It's almost like a science fiction novel. How it is you're going to force the education of an ape. And you gradually bring them into. It's like 2001. You're going to bring them into bigger and bigger kinds of messes in which the only ones that will survive are the ones that solve the puzzle. And you end up with a much more developed ape, so to speak. Right? The same thing that happens over here. The ability to distinguish ourselves from Mitzrayim doesn't require a lot of thinking. That's for sure. But when you get already to Yavan, then you got serious problems. Because then you have true competition in terms of philosophy, visions of the meaning of life, and so on and so forth. Right? You get to the development of Western civilization as a whole, the combination of Yavan and Malchus Edom, you really get into serious trouble to the point where 99% of Jews have accepted a Western paradigm, which has completely removed them from any connection to Torah, even though it looks almost exactly the same. In a sense, it's a doppelganger. And the difficulty and the terror of separating the real from the non-real is the stuff of terror novels, of monster books, because it really looks the same. So you think that at least when it comes to getting a good deal from your cousins, you'll get a good deal. And that's wrong. You'll get the worst problems from your family. And that's what that God is trying to bring out. To deal with Paro, that's part of the Nimrod Avram issue. I'm going to deal with Paro, I'm going to deal with Nebuchadnezzar. These are people that have nothing personal in what's going on. They have political reasons for dealing with what they're dealing with. When you're dealing with your family, look at the difference between Lavan, even at such an early stage. Paro wasn't interested in taking over. He just wanted to control. Lavan claimed it was him. This is me. This is mine. And in fact, genetically speaking, it was. Right? That's what's so shocking. In terms of taking the genes that come from Lavan, if you take all of his daughters, bring them back into the picture, he's got the same amount of genetic material involved. So that's pretty amazing. When you get to the real Goliath, there what you're talking about is the difference between family members. The Yishmael and Yitzchak issue is going to be infinitely worse than the Paro question. The Yaakov and Esav is going to be much worse than that, and so on. Well, and what's amazing is if you take a look, the only thing that has been preserved Keneged the Goliath are only these three challenges. There are three challenges that are discussed over here. One is Lavan, one is Yishmael, and one is Esav. All of them have representation in their insistence that the old city belongs to them. Those are the four quarters. Aram, of all crazy things, people have no idea. What is there? Why is there an Armenian quarter? You understand? The Armenian quarter is Lavan. It's from Aram. It's still speaking his language. They literally speak Aramaic. They speak the language of one. They speak Targum, right? Yagar Saduta to them is, Yagar Sadut, of course. I know what that means. What does Galed mean? It's unbelievable. So you've got Asa, you've got Ishmael, and you've got Lavan. Those are the only ones that have any claims, right? You certainly don't have
Galed runs almost between them.
That's right.
Almost.
Right. So you don't have a Mitzri quarter, and you don't have a Bavel quarter, and so on. But you have these are the areas that you have, and I mean what's amazing is that as you get closer and closer, and people don't appreciate the fact that the doppelgangers are worse when they come from within Israel. That's the biggest challenge. Because what you have is vast numbers of Bnei Israel who have no real connection to Bnei Israel. They keep all of the mitzvahs. They look like they're Jewish. They smell like they're Jewish. They have the same gefilte fish and bagels and everything else. So have all of the ethnic connections, all of the religious connections, but none of the connections that have to do with haGadol.
Gosh, I just saw an article from this Shabbos. There was a fight over herring, which ended up in a stabbing in a kiddush.
Yeah, okay, I'm not surprising. But
Nothing to be rare, you can guess.
But what's most shocking is the idea of the Arba Bonim. The Arba Bonim themselves represent the cynicism, apathy, smart acidness, and stupidity that are part of the society around you. And they're in your family. And they're infinitely frustrating.
Wow.
Yeah. So in other words, your response, your ability to have a level of zechira that will instigate an interrelationship with that is an unbelievable part of a completely new level of narrative. For you, you can't do this. There are no Arba Bonim if you have not achieved a level of zechira that expresses your identity. If your kid asks you, because he's programmed to ask, and you're telling him, if you were there, you wouldn't have gotten out, I'll just kick you in the mouth. That's not going to be a hakeh shinav. It only will set him on edge when he sees that it really makes a difference. That's the point. If I see that something really does matter, and then I have the sense that, and I have no connection to it, I'm not so sure that that's smart, that I should have no connection to it. This beautiful story that Sachs writes, in one of his last letters, that Oliver Sacks.
His visit to Israel?
His visit to Israel. It's unbelievable. Like he never, ever considered that maybe he lost out on something by not sticking with his Yiddishkeit, This is like, because he was a homosexual. His mother driven him crazy, called him abomination. He threw everything out. Then he came back, like before his death, he came back to Eretz Israel. He's relatives to Oman, the Nobel Prize winner. And he said he was so moved by like how real everything was to them, and how they treated him with that realness. That like for the first time he thought maybe he should have kept Shabbos. Maybe it's an amazing thing for a guy on that on that level to write after he only has a few months left to live. It was really very special, and that's the only thing that's going to make the difference. The children will not ask. Why would they ask? So the ability to confront that and to be able to develop a narrative, and in turn, again, it's about you. It's not about the children. It's not about winning the children. But it's about being able to have a narrative within that. That is the realization of B'chol Dar V'Dar. Because what it was that Avram Avinu would have to do is to come up with that narrative. And that's what made him faint. Because I wouldn't have a clue about what to say. What would he say? Think of all the things that he said. What would it mean to anybody today? I heard all of that a million times. I mean, that's 5,000 years old. I mean, you got anything else to say, old man? So, I mean, the question of feeling completely lost, out of your elements, having nothing in common with the people that you're talking to. They're a completely different world with totally different sense and place in the universe of what it is to exist as a human being.
Choni,
Even Choni, even 70 years puts you totally off, right? So that is an immense, immense challenge. What most people do is they just pull back. You know, well, you don't want to sit, say it enough, sit, say. And that's all my responses. Because you're lost, because you have not developed that dark avatars. That's unbelievable. So that, unbelievably too, is the end of the Shabbos haGadol, Haftarah, the amazing end of the Shabbos haGadol. הנה אנוכי שולח לכם את אליהו הנביא לפני יום בו יום השם הגדול והנורא, והשיב לב אבות על בנים ולב בנים על אבותם. What in the world does that have to? That becomes the key to the Seder of Pesach itself. So in which that narrative and that continued relationship of the genetic mimetic idea of Pesach is capable of reaching some type of realness, that requires the involvement of this Malach HaBrit in order to be able to achieve it in its final sense. And that is the Brit. That's the Yom HaShmini that begins over here. Uva Yom HaShmini, Yemo B'sar Lata, which becomes the Malach HaBrit, which becomes Ariel, which becomes at the end of the entire process. Ve'yeshiv lev avot al banim. The deepest expression of the relationship of your ideas of evolution in the very penis that creates those children. But it's an unbelievable oneness of just a continuum of ideas that relate from beginning in the parsha of year all the way to the end of the Haftarah of Shabbos haGadol. And it's like really, it's shocking that all of this could possibly be part of like the choice of the introduction to Pesach. And now, the question is this: translating this into haGadol proper. What is the local time? I'm so totally confused.
8:25.
Right. So, it's just, how long has this been going on? Because the question is whether we should take a break. Yeah, I think we should take a break. I've made a part 2 anyway, so that this way. So this would be the introduction. Essentially, let's review this introduction. No, let's not. We always do that in the next piece, right? Right. We end here, and then when we start the second section, we do it right here. Okay, we'll be back with you in 15 minutes, 10 minutes.
Okay.
We're gonna have bagels.
Oh, you want to have the bagels now? Sorry. All right.
Now?
Make that 20 minutes.
25.
No, I think we can. 20 minutes, we should be okay.
What? Bagels?